Hi, this is Tim Weber from South Texas College and coming to you with a video on adulthood. In fact, first of three videos on this part of the lifespan. And so we're talking about the time as people move from emerging adulthood into adulthood proper. We'll be looking at the development of personality and personal needs in this video. Then the following video is going to pick up needs for intimacy, close relationships with others, and a third is going to pick up on generativity, which we'll define later. So let's get into then, here we go, some of the psychosocial development, so psychological characteristics that also may involve our interactions with others. And what we'll see is some of the topics that you run into in this chapter may occur in other life stages as well. For example, examining one's identity. We may do that in adulthood. We also may do that already in adolescence as well, and maybe in late adulthood. So these are not always specific to adulthood, but tend to come to the forefront. Marriage, parenthood, divorce, empty nest, all of these things may occur during this period, most likely to occur during this period, although again, may occur at other periods of the lifespan. When we look at adulthood today, we're going to find that it is more fluid than stage-wise. Okay, so if we try to set up a series of stages that everybody is going to go through, we're not going to be able to really characterize very well the diversity of experiences that people have. It's much more variable that we can't really say, well, here's this stage of adulthood, and then we have this stage, and then that one. And as well, development in each area of life can occur independent of how the person develops in other areas. So what we're going to find is we can make some generalizations, but we can't really specify, well, here's a stage, and then there's a stage, and then there's a stage. So let's have a look at Ericksons theory, which we often do, that then picks up a number of things that may be significant in adulthood. So normally we identify identity versus role diffusion with adolescence or emerging adulthood, but in fact, adults may also grapple with a sense of identity. They may have to reassess some aspects of their identity as they move through adulthood. And for example, as they maybe have children that they've raised and the kids move away from home, they're now going to have to reassess who they are. Parent might have been a big part of their identity, but now they're not parenting kids every day. And so, well, who am I now? What am I about? Intimacy versus isolation. That's something that, again, we look at in emerging adulthood as becoming very important to people, having very close, committed relationships with others. We're going to find that adults do devote considerable time and energy to these type of relationships of various kinds. You'll see a variety of them. But these intimate relationships may be disrupted by death or divorce for the adult. And so one might flip from having needs for intimacy being well satisfied to suddenly experiencing a sense of isolation. And how do you deal with that? Also, adults often deal with the sense of generativity. And this is being able to leave something lasting, to make a contribution that's worthwhile. And often this is going to involve care, creativity, or sacrifice for the next generation. And so you will see adults sometimes engaging in the sacrificial sort of things for others that might not otherwise make sense until you look at what are they trying to achieve, what need are they trying to satisfy. For some adults also, the issue of integrity versus despair may become uh, especially important. And so some adults are going to begin to look at life and say, well, what I've been doing so far, does it have a coherent purpose? Does it hang together in a way that makes sense to me? Does it fit together and make sense? Has what I've been doing, does it really have meaning? And that might also then stimulate maybe some search for new ways to understand life. Um, Developing wisdom. So adults, especially as they move through adulthood, may begin looking back on things to say, well, what have I learned that can help me interpret things more effectively, that can give me better courses of action, and maybe that I can even share with others. And of course, the opposite side of that, as adults look at that, if they find that life doesn't seem to have any meaning or purpose, they may actually fall into despair. And so we see, for example, sometimes middle-aged suicides as being motivated by uh, difficulty finding a sense of integrity. So these stages of development that Erickson had, many of them can apply in adulthood. Now let's shift to having a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yes, we've resurrected that one. We haven't looked at it much since chapter 1. And you might remember that this hierarchy of needs is not a stage theory, but it is rather what Maslow found as to be universal human needs that everyone has, really at every age, but expressed differently at different ages. And having said all of that, some of these needs do come more to the forefront at various parts of the lifespan. And so let's just kind of follow this through developmentally and have a look at how our development might relate to these hierarchy needs. So the most basic level of needs are the physiological: food, drink, shelter. Quite obviously, this is the primary one that the newborn baby is grasping with. It wants to be fed, wants to be warm, and so forth. Babies crave nourishment and comfort. They might not be too much worried about esteem and so on. As we get into childhood, notice also that the need to be safe and secure also is very important for children, that they do feel safe and secure so that they can move forward to develop their intellect as well as their ability to interact effectively with others. And then as we begin to look at then love and belonging, and here what we have is, yeah, kids need to have a secure attachment with someone and develop that sort of relationship. Children crave then loving and accepting parents as well as friends who are accepting. Adolescents dealing with love and belonging are going to want to be part of kind of being in, right? They don't want to be in the out group where nobody wants to deal with them, where they don't belong. They'd rather feel like they belong with their peers than that they don't belong with them. And so that kind of is highlighted in both childhood and in adolescence, primarily. I shouldn't say primarily, because in all stages it's important, but it does really come to the forefront. And then in terms of esteem, adolescents, emerging adults often will work very hard to gain the respect and admiration of their peers and to get ahead so that they can be successful, admired, respected. So especially at that point. And into adulthood, you may see people working extremely hard for these goals related to esteem. Now, when it comes to self-actualization, again, this is a need that is present throughout the lifespan, but what we'll find is when you get into adulthood, often you have an advantage in terms of achieving this need. And what is it? Becoming your most unique and most wonderful self, being kind of the best you can be at whatever you're best suited for. And notice that many adults have at least relatively well satisfied lower needs on this hierarchy. And so that enables them to focus on self-actualization more so than if they were still striving to achieve these lower levels. The adult also has more self-insight. They know themselves better, so they know what they're best suited for more readily than maybe a child or a teenager. And also adults are more self-directed. They can make more choices of their own without having to first clear it with somebody else. So self-actualization then often takes on more urgency as we get into adulthood and we realize, hey, this is the time to actually develop my full potential. And hey, if I don't do it now in adulthood and I try to wait until I get into late adulthood, I may not have time. I might run out of time. So this becomes often more in the forefront as we get into adulthood. So now I want to just also pass on some other additional ideas that are related to Maslow's as well that I want you to consider. So one of the ideas of Maslow was that maladaptive behavior then stems from unmet needs. So if the person engages in theft, well, this may actually be due to a perception that they don't have what they need in terms of their physiological needs. They may steal because they don't have money for food. Or maybe they steal because, hey, they want to be admired by a certain group of people and engage in theft actually to gain the esteem of others or to belong to a certain group that engages in that kind of behavior. So we can see the connection between these needs and that sort of behavior. Or what about violent behavior? That again may stem from unmet needs. And this person maybe doesn't feel safe and secure, and so they lash out at others at the least hint of any danger and become violent. So you can see how that may come into play in terms of adult behavior. Now also, another idea might be that unmet needs stemming from childhood may cloud the adult's perception. So the child that never got a sense of being loved or belonging as a child may be obsessed with having everyone love them and being part of the group as an adult. And so their perceptions of even what love is and what it's about may be clouded. Or maybe the child who, the person who as a child never had enough to eat or drink. They may hoard food as a result, because their perception is, oh my gosh, you never know when you're going to not have enough food, so you better just have as much as you can on hand here. You see how that could come into play. Another idea based on Maslow, adults who are failing to develop their potential may in fact be struggling to meet real or perceived deficits in lower level needs. So that person that can't move ahead to develop their talents and abilities, maybe they're putting all their energy rather into feeling a sense of esteem. So maybe they would be wonderful as a counselor or therapist, but they're putting all their energy into becoming a medical doctor because, well, the people would maybe admire them or think more highly, or maybe the person actually would be best. They would be an awesome, awesome plumber. And so, but instead, they're again, they're trying to be something that they're really not suited for. And they're really studying to get into a different profession because, oh, it pays more, safe and secure, or because, again, people might think more highly of them. And by the way, I want to tell you something, you know, about thinking about professions. Yeah, people think about, oh, hey, doctors, they think highly of them because they save lives, and they do. That's true. But you know what? Plumbers save lives, because we can thank plumbers for modern sanitation. And, having modern sanitation that works right saves lives. And so you look at it that way, but they may not be looking at it that way. So you can see where trying to satisfy some of these lower level needs may put the person off course in really developing what they're best suited for and the way that they really can have a sense of satisfaction. Um, Here's another thought. Many times adults are more motivated by opportunities to achieve a personal best or overcome a challenge and develop themselves rather than money, fame, competition. Again, let's go to the chart. Okay, so have a look at this. Okay, and so maybe you see an adult and they have the potential maybe to really become very successful at something, earn a lot of money and so on, but they say, I don't care. There's no challenge to it. And so they drop that pursuit and they go on to something that's more challenging. And I'm thinking of and I think of a doctor that I know who basically left a very lucrative medical practice to go to a developing country where people were very poor, and he lives a very what would you say, modest life. But why? Because he found it more satisfying, more self-actualizing to really help people who were underprivileged and so on than to develop a big bank account. And so you can see how often, the adult may pass up the opportunity for money, fame, or to compete against others in order to better themselves or to maybe take on a challenge or to develop themselves as a person. So just some thoughts based on Maslow. Okay, so let's look at some ages and stages. I said, yeah, well, you really can't characterize adulthood by stages, but you can kind of, the social clock idea, this idea that, well, there's certain behaviors that are appropriate to certain stages of life or times in life that are set by social standards rather than biological maturation. So the idea that you should have your children at this age, you should get married at this age, by this age you ought to have your education completed, that sort of thing. That's what we're talking about by the social clock. And here's another example. What about the idea of middle age? Now, middle age, it depends. When does middle age start? Well, years ago, we used to think of people who were in their mid-30s as being middle-aged, but now you kind of, more people will say, well, nah, they're not middle-aged yet. They're not that old. Nah, well, maybe they're 45, 50. Now they're middle-aged. And notice the idea of what's middle-aged as an adult has changed as people have been living longer. So these are social constructions as to when people should be at various milestones and so on. This is also related to the ideas that maybe somebody's too old or too young. And often that is, again, non-biological. And for example, the woman that has a child when they're in their 40s, and some people say, well, they're too old for having kids. Okay, well, biologically, it may be possible for some 40-some-year-old women to give birth, but we might still see them as being too old for that, because as our particular culture is set up, we might maybe not be as well set up to do that, or maybe we are. Yeah, but it's this whole idea, or maybe the person is too young for that. So when's a person too young to get married? Well, that varies from one culture to another. Yeah. So this whole idea of social clock. So that does regulate somewhat what people do, or at least it tends to urge them towards doing things at certain times. So culture plays a big part in this social clock thing. And here's some examples. So in some South American and African countries, the legal age to marry is age 12 or 14, or when one reaches puberty, which is on average around 13 years old. Now we might think, oh my gosh, that's way too young, but in their cultural setting, this is thought of as to be within the normal range. Or have a look at this one. In Spain, the average age for women to marry is 32, and for men, 34. And realize if that's average, that means that half the people, it's later than that, and of course half earlier. But wow, you look at that, those are big differences depending upon the culture, the country you live in. Cohort also has an influence. Cohort, of course, is the group of people who were all born around the same time that with one another. So 100 years ago, women were expected to have their first child before age 20. If people didn't have their first child by then, what's the matter with them? That was the idea. Now today, obviously, it is expected to occur generally later than that. And we often think of people who have their first child before that age as well. That's too young. Again, this is part of function of cohort. Why 100 years ago did they expect people to have their first kids so early? Well, people didn't live that long. And so if you wanted to live to see your grandkids, well, you had to start early. So there's a difference. Social economic status also plays a part in this social clock. Generally, that social clock ticks faster for those who are of the lower socioeconomic status, those who have less income, less wealth, who don't have as much education, or don't live in the wealthiest areas. And so in people amongst lower socioeconomic status, often they're going to expect people to have their first child, to marry, to finish their education, and retire earlier than people who are more well-to-do. And so, finishing education, for example, well, if you're, if your family is relatively poor, it may be expected that, hey, if you finish high school at all without going to work, that as soon as you get out of high school, you better start working because the family needs the money. And is it retirement earlier too? Yeah, because often in poor families, that person is going to have to do very difficult physical work that really tears them down physically. And so they may say, gosh, if you can keep working until you're 50, 55, you're doing good, because that work takes a toll on your body. So you can see how, again, these things influence how people think about when certain events should occur in adult life. Okay, now there's this thing that a lot of people believe in that's actually evidently not real. This is the male midlife crisis. So this is shown by research to be actually again, social construction. something that people have agreed exists. Uh, Historical artifact of the 1960s and 70s. You know, the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of social upheaval, and many people really made very sudden changes in their lives. And people looked at this, men in their, you know, 40s or 50s, making sudden changes and attributed it to their age, when in fact that was all ages were doing these kinds of things. So the myth is that this male in middle age is going to have this period of unusual anxiety. They're going to question all of their values and end up rejecting everything they valued, radical re-examination, suddenly transform, and they're going to, you know, do things like they're going to quit their job and they're going to go off to be an artist, and they're going to divorce their wife and leave their family, and, you know, buy a red sports car, and so kinds of stuff. And studies just have found this is not typical today. No study supports that this is a typical pattern. Now, that's it. Do some men do this in midlife? Some do. But when it happens, the few that do this sort of thing, it has a lot more to do with their developmental history than their actual chronological age. And in fact, remember, we talked about identity status. Often, if one has foreclosed their identity and has simply what? Adopted all of the values that everyone else told them they should adopt, that they have, without questioning, simply gone into the vocation that they were told they should pick up without questioning it. Yeah, what's going to happen after they go along and they're supporting these values that they really haven't thought about on their own, doing work that maybe they're not really well suited for, just doing it because people said they should. At some point, they're going to begin to question that, and that's when this is likely to happen as a result of this foreclosed identity status. And then they begin to re-examine that and try to develop their own sense of identity, which they might have a lot of trouble with. And they might do some kind of crazy things like you're seeing up here, but that's not typical, the few that do it. That said, also, midlife adjustments are more common as people get into midlife as adults. Often they will look at things and say, you know, I think I do want to change course on this. I want to make this adjustment, but it's usually not radical. It's usually somewhere within the realm of what was, you know, kind of normal for them as well, but making adjustments, not a complete transformation. So let's have a look at then personality development throughout adulthood. And one of the things I want to say is personality tends to be pretty stable. And that's good because it's a source of continuity for people. It's a source of feeling that, you know, you're not having constantly shifting things about yourself. So it provides a sense of coherence, that things about me make sense. Oh, that's why I did that. That's because, you know, I'm outgoing, and of course I'm going to do that, you know, makes sense. Also provides a sense of identity. So if one has consistent personality traits, then that enables us to see ourselves in a certain consistent way. So maybe the person is very conscientious. We'll talk about that in a bit, but they conscientious, they're trustworthy, and they you know, do things the right way and so on. And so that becomes a part of their identity. This is the kind of person I am. So as we look at personality in adulthood, one of the best ways to go at it is to look at research into the big 5 personality traits. And this is the personality theory, the personality tool that has the most scientific backing, and indeed excellent scientific backing. So let's have a look at the big 5 traits in case you're not familiar with them. First of all, you have openness to experience. So the person that scores high on this scale is going to be likes lots of new ideas, likes to have new and unique experiences that they haven't had before. They like to find new ways to do things. The person who's low in openness to experience, well, they don't really like a bunch of new ideas. Come on, you know, let's how have we done this traditionally? Okay, so they tend to be more traditional. They tend to be more conventional. And again, they're not going to want a bunch of theories and new ideas that say, you know, this is the way I look at it, and that's that. Okay, so 2 opposite sides of that. C for conscientiousness. Conscientiousness, you score high in this, you are trustworthy, you're honest, you do what you say you're going to do. You pay attention to details. You try to do things the right way. You know, kind of thing that most employers want. Now, the person that is low in conscientiousness, what are they like? Well, you can't count on them. They will tell you they're going to do something, but they don't do it. They don't pay attention to details. They do sloppy work. You get the idea. So opposite ends of the scale again. E for extroversion. So extroversion, the high end of this scale, you are what? Social, want to interact with others. You seek stimulation. You also are active in the world in trying to influence the outside world, extra, right? Outside. The far end of this extroversion scale is the introvert, who is more about thinking than doing, is more about the internal life, and so more reserved, more on the shy side, more intellectual in many cases. Oh, well, not totally, but openness to experience is more intellectual, actually, but introverts sometimes are more intellectual. Okay, A for agreeableness. So agreeableness, well, yeah, you score high in this, what, you're cooperative, you're easy to get along with, you know, you're not consumed with dominating other people, but rather you're saying, how can we, you know, work together, right? The opposite end of this scale, the disagreeable end, you might not even like people at all. You might have actually ill feelings towards other people. You might be, you know, completely uncooperative, and the only way you interact with people is to dominate them. Very low in agreeableness, disagreeable. Then we have neuroticism, last one. Neuroticism has to do with emotional responses. So the person that is on the high end of the neuroticism scale has a lot of unpleasant emotions, you know, sadness, anger, that sort of thing, and also intense emotions and emotional ups and downs. The person who scores low on neuroticism, low end of the scale, tends to be what? Calm, easygoing, doesn't get worked up emotionally very easily. Okay, so 2 opposite ends of the scale. Okay, so what we find looking at people and how they score on these personality traits tends to be pretty stable throughout adulthood, and actually lifelong. If the person as a child was extroverted, they're likely to also be so as an adolescent, emerging adult, and finally into adulthood as well. So you say, why is this? Why are these traits, why do they tend to be pretty stable? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is just the person's biology. So how does their nervous system react to things that are new and different? Now, if you have a highly reactive nervous system, and that's just the way you're biologically geared, notice you'll tend to be more introverted. You don't want a lot of stimulation. And you also will tend to be higher on neuroticism as you react strongly to various events that happen. So to some extent, biology, and I'm just giving you one example here, but there's numerous with the other traits as well. So biology plays a big part in this. Now, this also interacts with your environment and a certain thing we call ecological niche. So what people tend to do is they tend to select a lifestyle and a social context that's compatible with their personality and interests, which in basis may actually have a biological basis. Okay, so let's just say, suppose that because of the way your nervous system is, you tend to be actually very extroverted, and your nervous system tends to be not so revved up. So you're seeking stimulation, okay, to get that sense of activation that you need. So you're seek that stimulation in part by what? Interacting with other people. And so you then are extroverted. What do? You select a lifestyle where you get to interact with people a lot. And then you have a social context that reinforces that extroversion, okay? Because now you're in a place where you get to interact with people, and then you say, this is for me. See, this is what I'm like. And so that reinforces that personality trait as it becomes also a part of your identity. Now, what we will see is sometimes people have dramatic changes in their environmental situation, right? New things come up that maybe are not consistent with this niche that they've selected, that is consistent with their personality. But what they will usually do, you'll see new behaviors, but even those behaviors are consistent with these personality traits. So maybe you have that person that's very extroverted, and they lose several of their good friends that they constantly interact with. So they don't become an introvert then, okay? They don't change their personality, but rather what do? They find new ways to go out and interact with people. And so maybe now they're going to do that in a different way. Maybe if they can't go out in public, like we have the pandemic right now, and we're kind of more restricted in going out in public, maybe what? Now you get on the internet and you interact with people, you know? So you're really just finding new ways to express those same traits in a different environment in many cases. Okay, now, are there some shifts in personality in adulthood that are typical? Yes, and here are several of them, okay? So what we tend to see is a slight increase in agreeableness throughout adulthood. So as people get older, yeah, they actually become a bit more accepting generally of differences as well. They become less competitive, okay? Yeah, so more cooperative with others, less competitive as they get older. Also, increases typically in conscientiousness. So maybe the person towards the end of emerging adulthood, they're not so concerned about doing their work right, you know, they're more concerned about other stuff. But as they get into adulthood with their responsibilities, now they're more concerned that, yeah, they do that work in such a way that it's going to be acceptable, and that takes care of some of their other needs. So we tend to see that. We also tend to see slight decreases in openness to experience. So people, as they get older, they may not be so much interested in new ideas as they were when they were a young person. But even then, this is usually a slight decrease from where they were originally. Also, slight decreases in neuroticism. It's interesting that people with, for example, emotional disorders, psychological disorders that involve emotions, those symptoms tend to moderate as the person gets older and become somewhat less severe over adulthood. So slight differences here, but again, people tend to be pretty consistent on these, even though there might be slight changes in these areas. Now, there's also the influence of culture on personality. And for example, you can look at how people score on extroversion from one culture to another, and there's some slight differences culture-wise, but in fact recognize that the differences that we see from one culture to another are far less than we will see it in terms of individual difference within those nations. So there's a much wider wider net of differences within those nations. And so therefore, you're going to find that if you look at two people from two different nations, you can't predict who's going to be more open to experience just based on national differences. But again, overall tendencies are there. Another thing that we see in terms of personality in adulthood is what they call gender convergence. And so men and women's personality and behavior tend to become somewhat more similar as they move through adulthood. And so, for example, men become somewhat more, on a whole, somewhat less aggressive as they go through adulthood. Now, some of these changes may be because the hormonal differences between men and women lessen. Men typically have less testosterone circulating in their body as they get older, and as they do, this is going to lead to somewhat less aggressiveness in terms of their personality. Now, another reason for it, maybe I should give you more examples. Yeah, okay. So men might become less aggressive, might become more cooperative with others, which we kind of often associate more with women. But as time goes on, men might move more towards that direction. Women might become more assertive as they get older, which we usually associated with men being assertive. Okay, so there's a couple examples. Now, in addition to hormonal changes, maybe promoting some of these differences, also you might look at Carl Jung's theory in which we have this shadow side of our personality. And so these are all of the things that we look at that maybe they're actually part of us, but we don't want to own them. And we sort of shove them into the closet, so to speak. And so maybe that man actually does have the capacity to be very nurturing as part of their personality, but you know, they've been told, oh, that's not so manly, so they just shove that back into their shadow and they don't develop that ability. But as they get older and their need for approval from others maybe is less, they begin to say, you know, I really do have really enjoy nurturing other people. And so they begin to develop that sense of themselves. And the same thing with women. Maybe a woman has really ability to become very assertive and active in influencing her environment, but as a younger woman doesn't feel comfortable with that. But as she gets older, now things are opened up more to her, and she says, you know what, that really is a part of me. I kind of wasn't owning it all this time. I'm going to develop that. And so developing one's shadow side. So we might have, you know, younger men who are warriors become what? Judges, caregivers, peacemakers, women that maybe were more nurturing as they get older, may become more assertive. This is quite common. Okay. So let's look at then some adult needs And these have been identified by many different theorists using maybe somewhat similar, somewhat different terms. And each of these terms may sort of add a different aspect to it, but yet have something in common to how it was stated by others. So let's have a look at these. So Freud talked about the task of adulthood being to love and work. So to develop those intimate relationships, nurture others, to belong, as well as to work to have some positive influence on the world. Maslow expressed these as what? Needs for love and belonging, okay? And needs for what? Success and esteem. We saw that not long ago. If we look to the trait theories, these show up in terms of the needs for some interaction with others. So those who are extroverts may actually find it easier to engage in these relationships that involve intimacy, love and belonging. Also, conscientiousness relates to one's work. If you're higher in conscientiousness, you tend to be able to focus on work more readily and often tend to be a little bit more successful at it, unless maybe you're just an open artist or something. So it relates to it. Other theories might express this needs for affiliation to what? Be a part of the bigger group, or to affiliate with others in a close relationship, and the need for achievement to achieve some results in the work. This also might be expressed as emotional needs. So those needs that we have, again, emotional needs might relate to our interactions with others. Instrumental is having an effect on our world around us. Or we might express this as the need for communion and agency. So communion is what? Coming into union with others. Okay, so communion, relationships, right? Agency, again, affecting the world around us. So interesting that that one is sort of an inner and outer, relates to also emotional and instrumental. Or how did Erickson express this? Needs for intimacy, those relationships, love, and generativity to affect the world around us. Work, success, esteem, conscientious achievement, agency, and so forth relate to generativity. So there you go. So we're going to stop with that. That's going to tie us into the next topic that will be in the next video, and that is the achievement of intimacy and important relationships in adulthood. So we'll stop there. New video for the next one. Hope you're having a great day.